sound. We have George Leone here tonight. George is the president and chair of the board of Homecoming 250 Navy Marine Corps and its advisory committee chair. George previously served as a judge in the New Jersey Superior Court in Camden and in the New Jersey Appellate Division. Earlier, he was an assistant United States attorney in Camden and chief of the appeals division for the United States Attorney's Office for the District of New Jersey. The Attorney General of the United States presented George the Director's Award for helping to defend New Jersey's Megan's Law and the John Marshall Award for helping to lower crack cocaine sentences. George previously served as a Philadelphia Assistant District Attorney, an associate at the Deckard Law Firm in Philadelphia, and as a law clerk for Judge James Hunter III, a Marine veteran of World War II, on the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit in Camden. George is the son of a Navy veteran from World War II, was raised in South Jersey. Shout out for South Jersey. Woo! All right. Man, harsh crowd here. And graduated from Harvard College and the University of Chicago Law School. So let's give a nice warm welcome to George Leone.
Thank you very much for that introduction, none of which qualifies me to be here today. I did always have an interest in, because of my father's service and otherwise in the military, studied it in college, thought very seriously of joining it, but didn't have the eyesight to fly, which is what I thought I should be doing. So I decided the nation would be better served if I got a law degree instead. So, but now that I've retired from the bench, I set out to stop driving my wife crazy and find something to do. And what I had two goals. One was to keep Philadelphia from blowing its every 50-year chance in the spotlight, which it has done in the past on occasion, by having some major event here. And the second was to honor the services that were founded here, the Army, the Navy, and the Marine Corps. As I went along, I figured that trying to combine the Army and the Navy and the Marine Corps was too difficult because the Army's 250th birthday is in June. It lost most of its battles anywhere near here, and therefore the best place I could think to celebrate them was Valley Forge. But the Navy and Marine Corps were founded on the waterfront of Philadelphia, and that didn't seem to be possible with those difference in dates and the difference in locations to combine them. Plus, after I fought my way up through the Navy bureaucracy, fighting my way up through another military bureaucracy was a little bit of a daunting task. So what I'd like to talk to you tonight at my own risk is the Navy and Marine Corps history of this area, which you probably know a fair amount of. And I'm told you can heckle me if you want, but I'll be happy to answer your questions at the end. And also talk about what we've managed to do to basically use Philadelphia's assets to leverage in a national celebration. As many of you know, you may know a little bit what America 250 is. Well, you may know that what America 250 is or is not doing. You may know what America 250 PA is doing. You may know what Philadelphia 250 is doing. And none of those at the moment involve a major celebration in the city of Philadelphia, the birthplace of this nation. They involve other things. They may be great things, but they're different things. They're not celebrations. They're not the things that bring tourists into a town. That's what we're trying to do. So let me go at my own risk again to tell you a little bit what I understand the history of this area with the Navy and Marine Corps is, and how we use that history and our assets to get the Secretary of the Navy to commit to bringing the Navy and the Marine Corps 250th celebration to Philadelphia. And then I'll tell you about the celebration. So bear with me. So as you all know, at the time of the Revolution, Philadelphia was the second largest English-speaking city in the world. It was also the largest city in the colonies, obviously, and the largest port in the colonies. And this is a view from New Jersey. No more New Jersey jokes now. A lot of your tourists come from New Jersey. It's part of the metropolitan area. You don't want to ignore it. It's a business basis for you guys. Anyway, this is the view of the city from across the river in New Jersey, and you can see that the one tower that towers above the others is the one that's right there. Christchurch. And because it was the nation's largest port and at that time the political center of the United States, it was natural that it was here that the Navy and the Marine Corps were created. The Army, as you may know, was actually created in the field up in Massachusetts. Its commander was, and its name was created here. But the Navy and the Marine Corps were created from here from whole cloth by the Second Continental Congress in Independence Hall, which created a Navy on October 13th, 1775 by agreeing to get ships and commission officers. And on November the 10th, 1775, created a Marine Corps. After a month, it took them a month apparently to decide if they had ships, they needed Marines to put on the ships, but they figured that out. So, and actually this is not to mock them. One of the great stories of the Revolution is all these civilians combining to create a military force to oppose the greatest empire in colonial empire in the world. So it is a tremendous story. I'm not trying to make fun of them. And the civilians that were involved were largely people from here. You had John Adams, who wrote our Navy's Articles of War and was one of the driving forces for the creation of a Continental Navy. You had Francis Hopkinson, who was a Philadelphian who moved to New Jersey and who, among other things, designed flags. Behind these figures is the flag he designed for the Navy, which was one of the prototypes for the American flag that we now follow. And he was on the Marine or Navy committee. The name changed over time. And then you had perhaps the one who was most important of all, Robert Morris, financier of the Revolution, who paid for the Navy and who stuck with it all that when Adams went off to be an ambassador to France, etc., and Hopkinson did what he did, it was still Robert Morris who was keeping the Navy afloat for most of the time. And as you know, one thing I know as a tour guides, and what I'm aiming towards in this presentation is encouraging you to think about tours that the people who come here to see the celebration, which we estimate will be about 300,000 people, either from here or tourists, will attend events for this celebration, that you can think about ways to show them this history and whatever other history you know about the Navy and the Marine Corps, because that's what they're coming here to see. And so as you'll note on here, I won't try to read them all, but so many of these people are buried here and their graves are mostly nearby. So that's one sort of tour that you could design to take people to, for example, Stephen Decatur's grave, which is quite dramatic. But we'll get to that in a minute. So but here we've got Christchurch and Christchurch for the civilians. Now, as I said, the Navy was created on October the 13th. The Navy went out and rented, or purchased rather, ships. And one of the first ships it purchased was a ship called the Black Prince, whose captain was a captain named Barry, John Barry to be precise. And they changed its name to the Alfred because King Alfred was the person who created the British Navy, at least in legend. And this is a painting of the first Navy ship having the first American flag, the Grand Union flag, raised on it by a young lieutenant whose ties to this country are mostly based here. But he was from Scotland and he was fleeing a murder charge. And his name was originally Paul Jones, but to disguise that, he called himself John Paul Jones. Very clever. And so, and you'll notice in this picture, although the waterfronts changed because when they took the islands out of the Delaware, they piled all the dirt on the Pennsylvania side. So the waterfront here is about 1,000 feet where it used to be. You notice what towers above the Alfred here is Christchurch. Now, as I said, the Navy was formed here and they commissioned their officers here. So first, as we said, we have John Paul Jones, but then they commissioned a number of people who are from here, including Captain Nicholas Biddle, which I think it says on the bottom was born in Philadelphia. I can't say where he died because he was on his frigate exploded when fighting the British. So his pieces are somewhere in the sea. And then the person that the British feared even more than John Paul Jones, who's a little less well-known though, named Gustavus Coiningham. These are all people, and I don't know if you can see, because I can't tell on the computer if you can see, but they're buried here, right? Except for John Paul Jones, who's in Annapolis. Right. Does it say that on the bottom of the screen? All right. All right, that's just because it cut it off. So actually, so I'll say Coiningham is at St. Peter's Church. Thank you. Now, as I said, about a month after they decided to get ships, they decided to get Marines. And they turned to Samuel Nicholas, a Quaker, who would to raise a company, 2 battalions of Marines. And he decided to do a recruiting drive. And although there's historical dispute about where that recruiting drive went, the official Marine Corps version was that it was held at a place called Tun Tavern, which I believe you're all probably familiar with, because Tun Tavern was a tremendously historic tavern. At that point, it was almost 90 years old. It had been founded almost as soon as Philadelphia was founded. It was the Mariners Tavern, or at least one of the Mariners Taverns. And so Samuel Nicholas decided to have the Marines recruiting drive in Tun Tavern. May have also done one in Conestoga, but there was one in Tun Tavern. And so even though the Marines were founded like the Navy in Independence Hall, they much prefer to think that they were founded in a bar. And so, as you know, we were talking earlier, one of the top questions I'm told at the visitor center is, where is Tun Tavern? Because every Marine is trained in boot camp to know the Marine Corps was founded in 1775 in Philadelphia at Tun Tavern. They come to see it, and nobody told them that it was destroyed before the Revolution was over, apparently in a street widening. And as you may know, its original site is now the southbound lanes of I-95. But there at least was a historical marker it was at front and it was water between Chestnut and Walnut where it was. There's a historical marker front between Chestnut and Walnut, except I think it's been removed because of the cap reconstruction project. I don't know what they've done with it, but they're going to put it back, I'm sure. So this is a very nice 1920s view of what the recruitment of the Marines at Tun Tavern looked like, with them in their beautiful green uniforms. And I think you might appreciate that this is the 20s view before the sesquicentennial. This is the 70s view before the bicentennial. Apparently, it was earthier in the 1970s than in the 20s. So they show a Philadelphia waterfront that has animals running around it and puddles everywhere, and everybody looks scruffy. And there isn't a green uniform particularly to be seen. Maybe those chartreuse kind of those turquoise guys in the back. But this is where the Marines were created, and they all know it. And they all care deeply about it. Now, not only were both services founded here, they actually launched their first missions. This is where the first American fleet set sail from. It's also where the first Marine Corps amphibious operation set sail from. The Marines had great travel agents. They decided to go to the Bahamas. And they went down there to seize gunpowder and cannon from Fort Nassau there. And they got gunpowder, but not all of it, and didn't get much in the way of cannons. But this is a painting of that landing. And one of the ships in that landing is the Providence. We'll talk more about her because she's coming. A replica of her is coming. So that's the first Marine Corps landing. And here's probably one of the most famous historical paintings of the American military ever. And that boat contains 2 presidents that's crossing the Delaware, but no Marines and no Navy people. That's not for want of trying. Then Washington had basically sucked the Marines and the Navy out of Philadelphia and brought them up on foot to fight with the Continentals as they crossed the river. But they were supposed to cross in Burlington County. The water was too icy. They couldn't make it across for the first Battle of Trenton. And that's in a Durham boat, and we're going to get a Durham boat here. The Washington Friends of Washington Crossing is going to bring a Durham boat here and row it around. So that'll be a great thing to see. Spell Durham, D-U-R-H-A-M. And am I getting close enough to the mic? Okay. All right. So, but the Marines and the Navy folks, including John Barry, who keeps coming up like a bad penny in these stories, all did make it to the Second Battle of Trenton. And then they had the first real fight at the Battle of Princeton, where this is another 70s drawing showing Washington rallying the Marines. And in fact, he did. It was partly the Marines that caused that battle to change hands and the Americans to win it at the Battle of Princeton. Now, another thing historically, it's a little far for your tours, I suspected, because this was a big port, the British wanted to get a hold of it because for all the other reasons I mentioned how its importance. But because we wanted to run this port, we had to get ships out of the Delaware. And it's a long haul from Philadelphia down the Delaware with, as you can see from this drawing, a lot of interesting shoals and so forth. And the Americans had to figure out how to do that and run the British blockade. And one of the people who did that was John Barry. And there was one of my favorite stories from this is that this is, again, a little far afield for your tours, was what they call here the Battle of Turtle Gut Inlet, which is in Wildwood Crest, New Jersey, which is like a James Bond movie. They had a ship full of gunpowder. They were taking it to Philadelphia. Gunpowder was the thing the Continentals needed more than anything. The British were right on their heels. They beached it. They started taking the gunpowder out. When they realized they couldn't get it all off before the British took the ship, they set a long fuse and they fled, and the British got on the ship and it blew up and killed them. But was a big moment for John Barry. That's the ship that blew up. And obviously the British did want to get here, but they had one thing that was thwarting them was the forts on the Delaware. So for that and other reasons, the British didn't come up the Delaware to seek. They've already tried coming through New Jersey. That didn't work. They thought about coming up the Delaware, but instead of doing that, they came up the Chesapeake because the Chesapeake was not fortified. And they marched up from the Chesapeake to take Philadelphia, as you know, in a series of battles fought in Philadelphia, around in Brandywine, Germantown, etc. But then they still didn't have the forts. And therefore, the British Navy couldn't resupply them or reinforce them. So there was this 3-month battle for these forts. And the Continentals and their allies did a great job defending these forts. And there were basically 3. There was Fort Billingsport, and if you look at that diagram, you can see there is a barrier going across the river there. That's the Chevaux de Frise. And then there was Fort Mercer in New Jersey, across from Fort Mifflin on an island in the Delaware in Pennsylvania. And so the Navy and Marine Corps, even though the U.S. Navy was still an embassy, and there was the Pennsylvania Navy in this particular effort was probably a little more important than the Continental Navy, all the Marines and the Navy played a significant role here. So the Marines held Fort Billingsport as long as they can. This is a picture of them evacuating it. And then Fort Mercer was one of the few battles of victories for the Continentals in the battle campaign for Philadelphia, because the Hessians were sent down to take Fort Mercer, and they were roundly defeated and their leader killed. And Fort Mercer still has, I love Fort Mercer because it goes by so many names. It's Fort Mercer, it's the Battle of Red Bank, and it's in National Park, which itself is an interesting name. I'm told, I thought it was because there was a cemetery there, but I'm not entirely sure that's why they called it National Park. But that obviously is still here, and people might want to see that. And then Fort Mifflin, you probably know that history pretty well because it's still here. Fort Mifflin held out the longest, and the British eventually bombarded it into submission. But before they did, it was, I think, the largest bombardment in North American history at that point. But before they did, the Fort Mercer or Fort Mifflin or an accident destroyed the HMS Augusta, which was a ship of the line. In other words, a battleship of that day. It was the largest ship lost by the British in the Revolutionary War. It was the largest ship, I think, including the Napoleonic Wars and the French Revolutionary Wars. I don't think they'd lost a ship that big. And it was the largest ship sunk by Americans until the Spanish-American War. So Fort Mifflin is a great place to include in your tours because it also served as a Navy base and a Marine Corps base, as well as an Army base at various times in its history. Also, when we bring the ships up, that's the best place to see them, is probably Fort Mifflin. Now, once the British took the forts and took Philadelphia, they eventually, as you know, were forced to withdraw by France coming into the war. But the Americans having retaken it, there were still enormous numbers of battles in the Delaware Bay, particularly. And there's 2 of them here, the Battle of the Delaware Bay, which we won, and the Battle of the Delaware Capes, which we lost, which you see these battles are happening after Yorktown. The fighting is still going on. So again, not a tour site for you, but a good piece of history to know. Obviously, there were subsequent battles against U-boats in the Delaware Bay as well. So one thing that a lot of people don't know, but you might, the Navy and the Marine Corps went out of existence after the Revolutionary War. The Continental Congress did not think they could afford them, and they did not think they needed them. The French and the Barbary pirates convinced them they needed them, and then they found the money, or rather, the new federal government, when Philadelphia was the capital, found the money. So not only were the Continental Navy and Marines founded here, but the U.S. Navy and U.S. Marines were founded here when this was the capital of the United States in Congress Hall. So we have both buildings where these services were founded and refounded. George Washington refounded the Navy in 1794, and the first officer he picked to serve was one of the most successful captains of both as a privateer and as a member of the Navy during the Revolutionary War, Commodore John Barry. He's obviously, this one you can see, he's buried here at St. Mary's. And when we had the Navy and Marine Corps week last year as a sort of reopen the lines of communication for this whole thing, the Navy made a point of having a ceremony at Commodore Barry's grave. And he's technically, there's a big debate about what he's the father of, if anything. But I think it's fair to say he's the father of the U.S. Navy because he was the first officer and the first flag officer of the U.S. Navy. The Continental Navy, John Paul Jones was probably, and Coiningham were probably more important. And I love that there's only 2 statues at Independence Hall, and one of them is John Barry. That's because we have a great Navy? Maybe. Is it because Irish Americans were extremely proud of John Barry and had the political force to be able to put a statue in the middle of Independence Square? Most likely. But still, that makes this a great place for events in our, since we have this great American naval hero there, and also as a nice thing to point out in your tours. Now, not only did they get officers from here and fight around here, they also, this turned out to be one of the great centers of Navy shipbuilding for 200 years. And that started as soon as the Revolution started. After they bought ships, they started to build ships. And they started a shipyard very soon thereafter right near Old Swedes. And I believe there's a historical marker there where the shipyard used to be. And that shipyard was tremendously important, particularly for the U.S. Navy, because when the U.S. Navy was refounded, they came up with a scheme to build 6 frigates. There's books with that title, the 6 frigates, that started the new Navy. And it's showing that times change. They spread those frigates out to every congressional district that was humanly possible. But one of them was in Philadelphia, and the designer of all the ships was from Philadelphia. That's Joshua Humphreys. And he designed and this is a picture, by the way, of the building of the frigate Philadelphia, which is interesting because it was a subscription frigate. The Navy did not pay for her. The citizens of Philadelphia did. They wanted to create a Navy. And as you may remember, Jefferson was against the Navy, so he didn't really want to have big ships. He thought it was authoritarian. But the Philadelphians gave money to build the frigate Philadelphia, which had an interesting history after that.
What date?
That, I think the frigate Philadelphia was around, 98 or so. It was not one of the original 6. It was certainly thereafter. And the original 6, though, all of them were designed by one man from this area, buried in this area, Joshua Humphreys, who designed the first of the 6 frigates to be launched, the United States, which was launched here, which had a very successful career in the quasi-war at France and to some extent in the War of 1812. And he also designed the Constitution, which is now still exists. Unfortunately, the United States was in Norfolk in 1861, so it was burnt to prevent the Confederates from capturing it. But the Constitution survived. It's the oldest commissioned warship in the world. But Joshua Humphreys designed it. And as you'll see in a minute, that's the United States sailing there. Well, you'll see in a minute, a lot of the captains of the Constitution that are famous came from here because this was the biggest city and the biggest port. One other thing, it took them 4 years after they created the U.S. Navy to realize that they needed Marines to go on the ships. They created the United States Marines in 1798. That was President Adams. And this is obviously jumping ahead in time. But one of the other things they created at that time was the Marine Band. So the president's own Marine Band was created here. Jefferson was the person who named it that, and he named it that in Washington a few years later, but it was Adams's band initially. And one nice thing about the Marine Corps bands, we're going to bring them back to celebrate at their birthplace, their founding. And one nice thing in the Marine Corps Band, its most famous conductor and composer was John Philip Sousa. And he, although not from Washington, although from Washington, he eventually settled in Philadelphia, wrote marches about Philadelphia, most prominently the Liberty Bell March. If you've seen Monty Python's Flying Circus, that's the Liberty Bell March. And he wrote it because I think his child was in a parade honoring the Liberty Bell. And when he wrote the most famous march he ever wrote, which is the national march of the United States, Stars and Stripes Forever, it was premiered. It had its official premiere here in the Academy of Music. Another tour point. And now, because it's such a prominent city, as I said, a lot of heroes came from here, particularly in the early Navy. I mentioned Stephen Decatur, who's actually, when the frigate Philadelphia that we saw earlier ran aground while fighting the Barbary pirates and was captured by the Barbary pirates, he snuck aboard it at night and set it ablaze, which Admiral Nelson of England called the most daring act of the age. The English are nice about compliments like that. Every once in a while, they'll say something really nice about the United States. But so he has a spectacular grave in St. Peter's. Then you've got these other captains of the Constitution. Truxton, I think, was a Constitution captain, but certainly was a very successful one. He's at Christ Church. David Porter, buried at Woodlands. William Bainbridge, that's a recognizable name, buried at Christ Church. Charles Stewart, another Constitution captain, buried at Woodlands. And Isaac Hull, perhaps one of the most famous Constitution captains, buried at Laurel Hill. So if to this, one thing I would encourage you to do is to think about whether you want to take a tour that takes people around this area to sites that are relevant to the Navy and Marine Corps. For example, there's a little square. I have trouble finding it, but it's in Independence National Historical Park of the first office of the Secretary of the Navy, right? So because there was no Navy department, he was under the Department of War when it first got restarted, and they decided they needed, so that's a site, and these graves are all sites. And the other buildings we're talking about are all sites that you might include. One, if you go a little further afield that you might include, is the Naval Asylum. That was created in the 1830s. It was open not because to host aged sailors, not crazy sailors. And but it's really important, besides it's being a wonderful building. I think it was designed by the same person who designed the Capitol building in Washington, William Strickland, right? Walter Strickland. Well, I get points for Strickland, even if I missed the first one. Thank you. But it also was where the Navy decided that it couldn't keep just training its people on board, because the old British system was you entered the Navy at 13 and you got trained on ship. That's how you learned your trade. They decided they had to have scientific training on land, and they started it here at the Naval Asylum, which was called the Naval School. And then after a few years, they said we should actually buy some land and create a permanent naval school, and that's where Annapolis came from. But this is where it started. And he's buried, Commodore John Biddle, relative of Captain Biddle. He's buried in Christ Church as well. And obviously Andalusia, his estate, still exists outside the city. And the building his brother or cousin, forget, John Biddle ran over here. The Second Bank of the United States obviously still is here as well. Now, Philadelphia's heyday with the Navy was in the earlier periods, but it continued to be incredibly important even through the Civil War and afterwards. First, it continued to contribute, this area continued to contribute his heroes. Admiral Porter, this is related to the earlier Captain Porter. Admiral David Dixon Porter basically was one of the two people who helped free the Mississippi from the Confederates on the Navy side. And he's born in Chester. He's buried in DC, but he's born in Chester. We created here the first practical seagoing ironclad, the New Ironsides, named after the Constitution. The Monitor was, as you know, the first ironclad. It was not a good seagoing vessel, as witness its current location off the Cape Hatteras. And as you know, well, Philadelphians took the Civil War very seriously, as Memorial Hall and all the things out there indicate. And they created monuments throughout this area, including the Civil War Navy monument that's on the Benjamin Franklin Parkway, next to the Army monument. And Civil War Sailors Memorial is how they refer to it. And Navy shipbuilding continued here as well. They outgrew the first naval shipyard down near Old Swedes. In 1871, they moved it down to League Island. And that was one of the great naval shipyards of this country. Eventually, in the height of World War II, employed 40,000 people. There's whole towns in South Jersey that are built to house people to live in the Navy Yard. Unfortunately, built out of asbestos, but leaving that aside. And then, and they had their own ferry, as you probably know, that would just ran across the Delaware to take people to the Navy Yard. And one thing I remember from my youth, I was one of 7 children. My mother would drive up here to go to the PX to get cheap food. And because my dad was a Navy vet. And I remember this crane. I wish it was still here. At the time it was built, it was the world's largest crane. And it could pick up, I think, a whole destroyer and move it around. Now, they can't hear me? Okay, well, I'll just do it this way then. And obviously, it was all, to some extent, the shipyard, and I have a shipyard expert here, so he can heckle me. But shipyard, a lot of what it did was repair and provision and equip ships, but it did build ships, and it did build, for example, one of the Iowa class ships, 2 of them actually. The first one being the USS New Jersey. The New Jersey was built in the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. It's currently being refitted in the same dock where it was completed. And when it was launched from Philadelphia, that's the picture of it being launched. Very poetically, they miscalculated the speed at which it would go down the ramp, and it actually touched New Jersey on the other side, which it didn't seem like a big problem until they realized that there were no propellers on the back of her yet. And when they went out and operated for the first time, they found there was mud in there from New Jersey. New Jersey mud's used to polish baseballs. We have good mud, right? So they had to bring her back to Philadelphia to get the mud out. And you see a picture of the Navy base in 55. As you know, it kept building and repairing and refitting ships for the Navy until the 1990s. But it was not the only shipyard in this area. There were tremendous shipyards here, from civilian shipyards here for centuries. Cramp in Philadelphia built a lot of ships. And one of them that was most successful and most recently successful was in Camden. It was called New York Ship because that's where they were going to put it. But then they decided they didn't want to put it in New York. They put it in Camden, but they didn't change the name. And New York Ship pumped out ships for World War I and World War II. You see there have those many destroyers there coming off the line. And you see above there the USS Saratoga. And what that shipyard did, and the Navy Yard and the other civilian shipyards did, for some reason, this was the center of Navy innovation. So it built here, and this is also for Chester and Wilmington, we'll include them, the largest ship of the line, the Pennsylvania, the first steam-powered frigate, the first screw-driven frigate. Those 2 changes together changed naval construction forever. The sails went, and those drove the ships. The first seagoing ironclad we mentioned, the first submarine, the Alligator, didn't do very well, but it was the first. And it also later on, they built nuclear submarines in Camden in the late 50s and early 60s. The first destroyer, the first cruiser, the first battleship, the first dreadnought battleship, the largest battleship, the New Jersey, which is also the fastest battleship and the most decorated battleship, and the first aircraft carrier, the first light carrier, the first escort carrier, and they also built a super carrier in Camden as well. So this great tradition, it's a shame it's gone, with the exception of Philly Shipyard. There's not a lot of shipbuilding going on around here, but it's another thing we use to convince the Secretary of the Navy that this was a place that the Navy should come back to because of its importance to the Navy over the centuries. Now, it's also as important to the Marines. I love this uniform of what was then probably, I can't read the insignia, but it's probably First Lieutenant or Corporal Butler, Smedley Butler. Smedley Butler was from this area, and he's buried at Oakland Cemetery. And when you read about the adventures of the Marine Corps in the 19th century, where they're being sent off to every South American and Latin American country you can think of to do various things on behalf of the United States, they leave from here. This is where the expeditionary forces always go from. And this is where Smedley Butler, who was renowned for his heroism and innovation in the field, went from. And as you see there, there's the Marine Corps barracks and parade grounds. That's probably the prettiest part of the Navy base that still exists. And I mentioned that the Marines were founded in 1775. That was all a creation of the 1920s. Originally, they dated themselves back to 1798 when the U.S. Marines were created. But a general named General Lejeune, or Lejeune, if you talk to some Marines, decided that that was a stupid year to date yourself back to. Nothing happened in 1798 that anybody remembers. So you should date yourself back to the Revolution, to the Continental Marines in 1775. He apparently was the guy who decided they were founded in a bar, tavern, rather than Independence Hall. He also decided that they should celebrate their 150th birthday and every birthday thereafter with a ball. If you know any Marines, Marine balls are a serious thing because they take their birthday more seriously than any other service. And there's basically a huge ball season for Marines that lasts for weeks. He said the first ball has to be in Philadelphia. That's where we're founded. And so the first ball was held, the dinner was at the Ben Franklin, and the dancing was at the Bellevue. And as you'll see later on, we're going to have the 100th Marine Corps Ball, because that was in 1925, in the same ballroom or ballrooms as the first Marine Corps Ball, which the Marines love. And you see this Inquirer article about the first Marine Ball there. So, all right. And I'll just mention that this area continued to provide heroes in the Navy and Marine Corps all the way through to the present. And there's three that bear mention here. Two of them, actually, this is a very New Jersey-centric slide. It just happens that in World War II, the most prominent people in the Navy and Marines from here were from New Jersey. So John Basilone, if you saw the follow-on to the Band of Brothers called The Pacific, it's basically the John Basilone story about how he enlisted, how he went to fight in Guadalcanal, how he got the Medal of Honor, how he was brought back, and he refused to stay doing the tour. He went back into the Marines, and he died, and I think it was in Iwo Jima. It's either Iwo Jima or Okinawa. I apologize for not knowing. And then you had the two great fighting admirals of the Navy in World War II. Bill Halsey was born in New Jersey. One of the great quote masters of the Second War, most of which are totally politically incorrect now. And then Raymond Spruance, the victor of Midway, who was raised in New Jersey. So they continued, and obviously many other heroes not on this slide were raised in this area and continue to serve in the Navy and the Marine Corps. And then the last asset that we took to the Secretary of the Navy was the historic ships that we have here. We have three. That may not sound like a huge number, but two of them are aces in the historical ship world. The first, we had the Bakuna. It's nice to represent the undersea Navy. It served in World War II and the Cold War. But the two aces are the Olympia and the New Jersey. The Olympia is the oldest steel warship in the world. It is the only surviving warship from the Spanish-American War, and the most famous, where it, and that war and the battle it fought at the Battle of Manila Bay, made the United States into a world naval power for the first time. And then it also served in World War I, and it brought home the unknown soldier from France. And I always tell my Marine friends, and the Marine, for some reason, they decided the place to put that coffin was on the deck. And then they ran into a North Atlantic gale. And the only reason that coffin made it back to the United States was that the Marine Honor Guard that was guarding it chained themselves to it and the ship to keep it from floating away. And that's the unknown soldier who's now in Arlington. And then, so you have, it's one of two ships from World War I that's still left. The Texas is the other one. And it's the only ship from the Spanish-American War. And then you have the New Jersey, which was the only battleship to serve in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, the only battleship in Vietnam at all, and also fought in the Cold War and in the Middle East at Lebanon and the Persian Gulf. It's the most decorated battleship in history and the most decorated Navy ship afloat. So we went to the Secretary to convince him that all these things meant that the Navy and the Marine Corps should celebrate their 250th birthdays here. He's from New York. It took a lot of persuasion that not everything happens to happen in New York, but we did persuade him. So he has directed the Navy and Marine Corps to come to Philadelphia and Camden, because we want to include the New Jersey. And frankly, it's good to have a bi-state celebration, and given the close relationship of these states. And to come here, this is the big national celebration for those services. It's not the only one, and the Marines celebrate their birthday wherever there is a Marine. They'll bring cake to them in combat, but this is the main national celebration. And he is all in on this, the Secretary of the Navy. So he's bringing assets, and we're going to use our assets to give this nation a great grand opening celebration of the semi-quincentennial. Let me tell you a little bit about that. If you're not already bored out of your minds, it's okay. You're only partially bored out of your minds. All right. All right. So the first thing that's going to happen, as I said, their birthdays are October, November 2025. The first thing that's going to happen in the summer of 2025 is several museums, particularly in Philadelphia, have offered their space for free to have exhibits on the Navy and Marine Corps' 250-year history. Now, I've cheated here because I'll tell you the ones that are definitely doing it. It comes back, there's still some negotiating to go on, but the Independent Seaport Museum obviously already has an exhibit on the founding of the Navy and Marine Corps. They're going to continue and expand that exhibit. Then you've got the American Swedish Historical Museum, which is a product of the sesquicentennial of the United States, and also very close to the Navy Yard. And if you've ever been in that museum, they have a whole room devoted to, I keep calling it the monitor room, but they call it the John Ericsson room because a Swede, John Ericsson, designed the USS Monitor, the most famous and revolutionary ship from the Civil War. They have a whole room already devoted to him. It looks like they're going to have a 6-month exhibit on the Navy shipbuilding, particularly focused on the Delaware, and that's going to use their main exhibit space as well as the monitor room and other spaces. Then you've got the Library Company of Philadelphia. Theirs is going to be a document-oriented exhibit, again, probably about 6 months long. And we're still working out exactly what the details are there, but there's some great documents about the Continental Congress resolutions. I would love to see those being displayed, the commission for John Paul Jones, things like that. The U.S. Congress resolutions recreating the Navy and the Marine Corps. And then obviously the battleship New Jersey is itself a museum. It's going to have exhibits as well. And we are working to get other museums involved. We may have a painting exhibit. That's not entirely clear. If we did, it might be at PAFA. And that's because they have great naval art already. The art on the right is their picture of the Battle of Lake Erie. And that on the left, you see what, as far as I know, is the only painting of an event in American history done by a great master, which is in the Museum of Art, which is Edouard Manet's painting of the Battle of the Kearsarge in the Alabama. That battle took place just off of Cherbourg. Europe had been at peace for a long time. This was big news, and every French painter with a worth of salt whipped off a painting of this battle, having not seen any of it, including Edouard Manet. But his paint, because he was a great painter, it's a great painting. So I'm hoping to get those, at least, I'm making sure they're displayed. I'm hoping to get them displayed prominently for this. And we're working with some other museums and see how they want to be involved as well. And we're working with the National Museum of the U.S. Navy to help curate this and contribute its own things to this, because as you may know, the National Museum of the U.S. Navy is on base in Washington. After 9/11, nobody can go to it. They're trying to build a new one that's not on base. It's a great opportunity for them to get their art out there and advertise that they're trying to build a new museum. We're trying also to work with the National Museum of the Marine Corps, which is a fully functional museum, but nobody really, but unless you're a Marine, you might not go to it. It's great. It's a great museum. I very much recommend it. We're trying to get them to send things up here too. And those would be going on during the celebration. So if you have tourists are here during that celebration, you might want to direct them there or show them where it is. On Independence National Historical Park, I don't know where the park went, but it's supposed to be there. We're having a number of exhibits because when we brought the Navy and the Marines up here, and at this point, they're so serious about this, vice admirals are coming here and generals from the Marine Corps are coming here to see where this celebration is going to happen. We are going to, and the thing they like best is, not surprisingly, Independence National Historical Park. And so we are going to have a celebration on October the 13th to honor the 250th anniversary of the Marine Corps. I can guarantee the Secretary of the Navy will be there. I would put money that the Secretary of Defense will be there, and I would think it's pretty likely the President of the United States will be there, because all the events in the semi-quincentennial that precede this are low key. We just had the Boston Massacre, the Tea Party, rather. The massacre was a little while ago. And there's going to be Lexington and Concord, Before that, they'll be here, the opening in Philadelphia of the First Continental Congress. But as you may know, that's going to be students come and reenact the First Continental Congress. It's not a tourist event. It's a nice event, but it's not a tourist event. This is the first big celebration event. And it looks also to be the largest event in the whole semi-quincentennial honoring the military and veterans, and the largest event here before June, July of 2026. So besides the Navy celebration on October the 13th, we are in the Marine Corps celebration later on. We're going to try to have here a all veterans reunion, veterans of all services, because while this is the Navy and Marine Corps that we're honoring here, we want to have all veterans here, and it's going to be a great event for veterans to see with all the things I'm going to just about tell you about going on. And so we are going to hopefully fill Independence Mall from one end to the other with veterans, have it be a picnic, and have veterans organizations, veterans service organizations, veterans heritage organizations around there to tell these veterans what services they can get from these organizations. We're also going to have performances by the Navy and Marine Band. We know from our little week, you may not have noticed it because it was relatively small, the Navy brought one ship in October, but it's the first ship it's brought here in 10 years or so. That may be maybe a little shorter than that. They brought up a ship. They brought about 300 sailors and Marines to do good deeds and perform, and they brought a Navy band and a Marine Corps band. We're hoping to get the Navy band and the Marine Corps band to come up from Washington and have them perform. Preferably, they're going to perform. We know that's going to happen. We're trying to have a major concert on Independence Mall, or if we think the weather, we don't want to risk the weather, do it in a place like the Kimmel Center, but have the Navy and Marine Corps bands perform. And the orchestra is very interested in performing with them. We hope to get headliners perform with them, which, among other things, had me pestering John Bon Jovi in person the other day because he's the son of Marines. I can't say I succeeded in that one, but you never say die. And we're also going to have the Marine Drum and Bugle Corps, which is more of a marching band, and called the Commandant's Own, and the Marine Silent Drill Team, which they sent up that last October as well. And we like to have a parade that leads into these festivities, which will remind the youth of these two cities and this area of their opportunity to serve their country. Some of the people who we have here don't have all the opportunities we'd like them to have. This is one opportunity they can have to change their lives. And so we want to have midshipmen come up from Annapolis, and our OTC people marching, and perhaps military people joining them. And we want to have fireworks. Can't shoot fireworks off of Independence Mall. We have to find a place to shoot them because, as you may know, the waterfront of Philadelphia is not ideally situated at the moment for this celebration. Somebody came up with this great idea to get ready for the semi-quincentennial, which is turning out to be a way of messing up the semi-quincentennial of the United States. But we are thinking that we are going to either have fireworks over the river, which would be perfectly natural for the celebration, or find a way to have them over Independence Mall, which is where more people can see them, or at least more people can get to them. Now, I've gone through all this, and I haven't told you any of the big ticket items here. The Blue Angels are coming. Now, I was trying to get a real full-on Blue Angels show where, they plummet towards the earth and they cross each other's paths and they're doing dangerous things all the time. And I thought the problem would be the airspace for Philadelphia International. That seems to be a surmountable problem. The problem is that you have to have a rectangle 2.5 miles long and more than a half mile wide where there are no humans. So that if something goes wrong, nobody dies except for the Blue Angels. Hopefully not even them. They can eject and let their planes go down there. There's no way to lay that rectangle over Center City, over the waterfront, without evacuating all the ships and also every place you could see them from. So what they're going to do is they're going to fly. It's in a way it's better. Get this broader. They're going to fly in formation all over Philadelphia, the waterfront, suburban Pennsylvania, suburban New Jersey. For 45 minutes, they're going every place. It's going to be a great sight to see, hopefully lower and faster than what they did during the pandemic with the Thunderbirds, where they were pretty high up. And we're also hoping to have, we have a commitment on the Blue Angels. We're also hoping to have Marine Corps Air do what only Marine Corps Air can do, which is to take its jets off straight up and down. Right, the Harriers and now the F-35s, which is what you see here. And so the hope is that they can do that either from because you'll see in a moment, they're bringing a marine aviation vessel here, either from that vessel, from the parking lots of Camden. Camden does have things to add here besides New Jersey. And one of it has huge parking lots near the river. There aren't any parking lots near the river in Philadelphia. The ones they have, they're tearing down. So, that might be possible if we can protect the parking lot sufficiently, or they'll just fly, hover, go up and down, turn all the way around in one spot and do things like that, which will still be a tremendous sight for people to see. And we're hoping also for Navy and Marine Air to come and demonstrate all the types that they have, not just the Blue Angels F-18s and the F-35s, and fly over the city, both the Navy and Marine Air, maybe some Air Force participation, to have the Navy SEALs come. They're very anxious to come and do demonstrations, and to have the Navy Leapfrogs come. They're very interested in coming. They've also told me they're going to strap me to one of them and throw me out of an airplane. We'll see if that happens. It's up to my wife. I'm willing. And we also hope, and this we'd have to pay for, unlike the military stuff, to have heritage aircraft come here, like these propeller-driven planes flying with the F-18 there, the Hellcat and the Bearcat, and just have aircraft from World War II and subsequently flying over this area. Probably the same way the Blue Angels are flying, just fly over the whole area and let everybody see them. But the original idea that got this started was ships. And we have gotten a commitment from the Secretary of Navy. There are going to be 4 Navy ships. I'm hoping to wheedle a few more ships out of them, as we'll discuss in a moment. But we know we're going to get one of these. This is an Arleigh Burke class missile destroyer, which got the Aegis system, which, if you've ever driven up the Turnpike, was developed in Moorestown. And we also know we got one of our Reach ships, which is the flat top there, which is a Marine amphibious, well, it's a Navy ship, an amphibious assault ship, but everything on it is Marines, except for the sailors. And it is the size of a World War II aircraft carrier. It's going to come up here. The actual fleet carriers now are too large. They can't get under the bridges to get here. But this can get up to the Navy Yard, and it will be going like the destroyer, apparently. I'm trying to talk the Navy into bringing the destroyer up between the bridges, but at the moment, the destroyer and the fleet and this amphibious assault ship of the Wasp class are going to go to the Navy Yard and be tourable there. The whole idea is to bring ships here for touring. And what we do know at the moment, the Navy's plan is to bring a littoral combat vessel to Penn's Landing, because they think that it's a shallow draft vessel and they're not quite sure how deep the water is there anymore. Plus, Penn's Landing, as you know, will soon be just an esplanade with a fence next to it. And they think that ship can fit there and people can get on and off of it successfully. I'm hoping to get a second Navy ship there. I'll do what I can. And then for Camden, at the moment, what they're planning to do is bring one of the ships at the bottom, a Spearhead class expeditionary fast transport, which means a catamaran that can go 45 miles an hour carrying tanks. And that's going to go to Camden, apparently berthed next to the New Jersey, but tourable through you cross the New Jersey, you cross over to the expeditionary fast transport. I'm still trying to get more Navy ships. The civil shipyards of this area, civil ports of this area, the Holtz, the South Jersey port, they've offered their facilities for free to the Navy for this purpose. I hope to take advantage of that. And the ships I would ask for, this is not coming at the moment, but I hope it will come, are the original Aegis cruisers that you see up in the right, the one that looks like the cruiser in the cornfield up in Moorestown. The Virginia class attack submarine. There are 2 that I particularly would like to get one of. The New Jersey, the USS New Jersey, is just about to be commissioned this year. Unfortunately, the Navy wouldn't let it come up to Canada because apparently, unlike Charleston and Savannah and Seattle and Pearl Harbor and Honolulu and San Diego, they won't risk Philadelphia and Camden by putting a nuclear vessel, which is silly because nuclear vessels have a tremendous safety record. But I'm going to still try to talk them into bringing it all the way here. But it's going to, at the moment, it's being commissioned up in North Jersey, away from everybody. But we're hoping to bring it to Delaware, or we know they can take a submarine to Wilmington, because guess what they just did? The president commissioned the USS Delaware in Wilmington. So if I get the Delaware or the New Jersey or one of their sisters up here, that would be a great thing to salute the undersea Navy. And then I really like to get a San Antonio class amphibious ship if I can't get her, because that'll bring a lot of Marines for nothing else. And your tour is not going to be just tourists or residents. You're going to be giving tours to sailors and Marines. And that's the ship I think is most likely to be added to this, and the ship that's most likely to be at one of the civilian ports with 1,800 Marines on it. And what I will say I'm trying to get also is what you see behind it. That's a hovercraft. That's how the Marines get ashore these days. We like them to demonstrate that. Apparently, they're incredibly loud, so hopefully that won't be a problem. But I think most people here have never seen a hovercraft. So just have one tootling around on the Delaware would be a great thing to see. And they also want them to demonstrate their smaller amphibious craft as well. You're asking an excellent question. That's a great question. If I failed to say it, I apologize. I think it was on one of the earlier slides, but the Navy and the Marines have agreed they want to do this together, and they want to do it in October, which is when the Navy birthday is, because the weather is better. And so it's from October 9th through the 19th, 2025. The ships will come in on the 9th, and they hopefully will leave on the 19th or 20th. And so the first weekend is being devoted to the Navy, because the Navy's birthday is that Monday, Columbus Day, Indigenous Peoples Day. And so the first weekend is going to have a lot of celebrations about the Navy. And that's the Blue Angels will come on the Navy's actual birthday, the 13th, that Monday. And the second weekend we hope to devote to the Marines, because we don't want to leave the Marines out. You don't want to piss off the Marines. And we hope to have the ships here tourable the whole time. And we hope to have aircraft flying over the whole time. We'll see about that. That depends what the Navy and Marines and our finances can do. But the museum exhibits will be going on, and the celebrations, there'll be a midweek period where it's a little slower, where it's just the ships to tour and maybe some airplanes flying over. But the weekends are going to be full of activities. That's where they're all going to go. There's also stuff on November 10th. I'll get to that in a second, because you don't want to piss off the Marines. So the reason that we got to convince the Secretary to bring these things here, one of the reasons was because of the Olympia and New Jersey, we can do something that nobody else can do. At least we could try to do it. At the moment, we're still trying. We can assemble here a ship from every major war in which the Navy and Marine Corps fought and defended the United States. Because we have the Olympia, nobody else is going to build an Olympia. So we've got, unless you want to have it Houston, that's wherever Galveston, wherever the Texas is, you don't have World War I, and we've got all these wars represented by the New Jersey and the Olympia and the Bacuna. So we really could assemble, if we can get earlier ships, we can have a really great, unprecedented naval display. We know we're going to get at least one earlier ship. That's the USS Providence. I mentioned her before. She took the Marines. She was captained by John Paul Jones. She took the Marines to the Bahamas. She was recreated for the bicentennial. And she's now based in Alexandria. She's going to come up here. Not only is she going to be tourable, she wants to sail people around, which I think will be a great thing. Which side of the river she's going to be berthed on is not yet determined, but that's a great thing. And we're also invited, and we're still trying to get ships from other earlier conflicts. The Constitution, she's a Navy vessel. The Navy can bring her if she wants to. They can tow her down. Or also to represent the War of 1812, the Pennsylvania State flagship, the Niagara. Does anyone remember when the Niagara was last in Philadelphia? It came here in the 90s because I took my kids on the tour. When I lived, there we go. I lived here at that time. I took my kids on a tour. She can come here, and the people who operate her want to come here. I have to convince the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, which owns her, that she should come here. If either of those ships come here, they're going to be coming from the north. It'll be like the Olympic torch. They'll go from Boston to Fall River to Providence to Newport to Groton, to New Haven to New York, saying, come see all this stuff in Philadelphia. I'm working on that. I'd love to have that happen. For the Civil War is tough. There's only one Union vessel in the water. That's the Constellation, the last sailing vessel of the United States Navy, which was obsolete at the beginning of the war, but did serve. She's in Baltimore, as you may know. She came here for the sesquicentennial in 1926 to be with the Olympia. We want to get her back. It's an easy sail. If they take the mast down, they can go through the canal from between the Delaware and the Chesapeake. We're working on that. And whether or not we get the Constellation, one thing we're trying to do is to recreate the most famous ship of the Civil War, the most revolutionary ship of the Civil War, the USS Monitor, as in the Monitor versus the Merrimack, right? As I mentioned, the monitor's at the bottom of the sea in Cape Hatteras. There's a lovely museum devoted to her at the site of her battle at Hampton Roads down in Virginia. And there's actually a mock-up of her, full-scale mock-up, but it's in cement. It's not going anywhere. We originally were trying to build a permanent monitor. We're working on a deal with a shipyard in Philadelphia whose name can probably be guessed. In the end, it doesn't look like they can do it. But what we may do, which would be much less expensive, is to build a temporary monitor using a barge. The one nice thing about building the monitor, it is the simplest looking naval vessel ever created. It was called a cheese box on a raft, right? And so we're trying to see if we can build a temporary monitor that can be towed around and be part of these festivities. May not last much longer than the festivities do, but we're trying to do that because the Civil War was, with World War II, those are the most important wars that the U.S. Navy ever fought, at least the most important roles it ever had. You can see I'm getting there. I'm slide 44, so don't fall asleep quite yet. You can leave, though, if you have to. Okay. So I already did this part. I'm doing it again. Yep. Okay. I'm almost done. And I've already done this. We are going to have, for the Marines, we are going to have the 100th Marine Corps ball in the same ballrooms where the 1st Marine Corps ball is. So I already told you all about that. And one of the tricks of that ball, besides it being organized by General Lejeune, was there was a person, the Smedley Butler. You saw him as a youth in a very silly looking costume from the late 19th century. Smedley Butler went on to become a general of the Marines. And then he retired to his dream job, being the director of public safety in Philadelphia during Prohibition. Bad move. All right. So one of the things that I think General Lejeune had in mind when he had this ball in Philadelphia was to lure Smedley Butler back into the Marine Corps, which he did within weeks of this ball. So there you have a much more handsome looking Smedley Butler and General Lejeune in the same period of this. And we're going to do this on November the 10th, both because that is the 100th anniversary of the original Marine Corps ball in Philadelphia. Secondly, it's the 250th anniversary of the Marine Corps. And third reason is because we want to give time to another project and help celebrate it. And that is the recreation of Tun Tavern. You've probably seen that in the news recently, my friends. This is being done. We were originally going to do it ourselves. We ran into an organization called the Tun Tavern Legacy Foundation that was already trying to do it. We've agreed with them that they should be the person that builds and operates and funds this tavern. We have a whole celebration to run, but we also agreed to have celebrations around the recreation of Tun Tavern. As I mentioned, this is an incredibly historic tavern, not only the birthplace of the Marine Corps, did I say this already, but of Freemasonry in the United States. Did I say that? Freemasonry in the United States, of the first immigrant societies, the St. Patrick's, the St. George's, the St. Andrews, of the, it's where John Adams wrote the Articles of War for the Navy. It's where Benjamin Franklin recruited for what became eventually the Pennsylvania National Guard. It's where George Washington had his farewell dinner the night before he went off to command the Continental Army. As I said, it was destroyed before the Revolution was over. Marines come to find it all the time. We are working with supporting the effort of the Tun Tavern Legacy Foundation to build it. And this is not, they have newer drawings than this one. This is the one I have, but I don't have the newer ones. I'm on their board. Their head's on my board. We're working together. They're planning to build Tun Tavern. They can't build it in the original location, the southbound ends of I-95. They can't really build it anywhere near there because everything's being ripped up. And it's also, they had to find a plot of land. They have found a plot of land. It's within 250 yards of the original location. And unlike some of the earlier plot of lands that we and they looked at, which were near, say, Society Hill Towers, where people weren't all that keen on having a Marine Corps bar near their location, it is in Bar Central, Philadelphia, as we are right now. It is at 2nd and Market. My car is parked currently in the location where Tun Tavern will be. It's on just south of Market on 2nd, which is going to be, it's at Bar Central. It's a great place to put a tavern. They're going to recreate it as best they can. The original tavern was about the size of a large suburban home. They hope to have that groundbreaking on that on November 10th, 2024. They hope to have the dedication of at least the shell of that building in November 10th, 2025. So we're doing our ball that night. to support that effort, we're also going to have celebrations around the recreation of Tun Tavern. And this will be a great thing for the city because Marines will flock to this like bees to honey. They cry when they hear this is going to happen, some of them. It's very sexy for them. It means a lot to them. They will come here for enlistments and re-enlistments and military reunions, and just to say they were here. If it turns out, you know Philadelphia pretty well, you know how the L&I works and everything else works. If it turns out that they cannot complete that tavern in the 18 months that remain before November the 10th, then even if it's a big hole in the ground, Marines will come to worship at the big hole in the ground. They will come to take their pictures just like they do with the historical marker to say that they were here. Right. They were here and they were on the Marine Corps' 250th birthday. They were at the site of the new Tun Tavern, which will be called the Tun, I think, because that was its original name. It was a tavern that was called the Tun. A ton, as you may not know, is a unit of measure that's a size of a barrel. And that's the symbol of the new Tun Tavern is the barrel. So this is going to be a great thing for Philadelphia, a great thing for tourism, a great thing for you. So it's a great thing that we support. There are other events. I can do them very quickly because they're not really tourism-oriented events. But we are having an academic symposium. Half of it's going to be at Penn and half of it's going to be at Rutgers. We're going to have a leadership symposium because we're bringing all these military leaders and political leaders. We want to get money out of corporate leaders. So you put them all in the room and they're all happy. We are going to have hopefully a maritime exposition. I just went to two things called Sea Air Space, which is the Navy's big trade show, and Modern Day Marine, which is the Marine Corps trade show. We're going to do a version of those, smaller, I'm sure, that's designed to link businesses in Philadelphia and this whole area to the military, because at the moment, the military is getting a little worried, as most of us probably are, and are thinking they better rebuild their industrial base that they let go after the Cold War ended. And so they want companies to come and do business with them, and the business companies could use the business. So that's going to happen. That may be at, say, I'm not saying it is going to be, the Marriott, for example. So it may be a place that generates more tourists for you because we're going to have it designed so that people can go to it and then go see all these events. And we hope to work out with the NFL that they have a Eagles home game either during that 10-day period or on November the 10th. Hopefully a nationally televised Eagles home game, which will allow them to, maybe allows them to salute the 250th anniversary of the Navy and the Marine Corps. We hope to have the Navy come play Temple at that time. We can work that out for the stadium. And we want to have a lot of other athletic events like 5Ks and 10Ks and Marines chin-up bars that they carry around to impress civilians. So it's going to be a tremendous event for this area. You've been very patient to listen to me describe it. I think it's nice to see history used for a good purpose. Here, this history is being used to put Philadelphia in the national spotlight. And no matter what Philadelphia does on July 4th, which I hope will be spectacular, but I'm not in charge of it. No matter what they do on July 4th, they are going to be competing with New York, which will have 30 tall ships in the harbor. They're going to be competing with Boston and Washington and all the other cities. And what people always do on July 4th, it's going to be, I'm sure there'll be plenty of business for you folks, but this is an event that'll happen before anybody gets tired of the semi-quincentennial, when it's the biggest event that's happened yet, and really the biggest event at that time. So this is going to get national attention to Philadelphia and hopefully positive publicity for a city and an area that needs it. So I hope that you can help me by building tours and thinking of how you can make this happen, make people who come here are interested in the Navy Marines have things to see that they're interested in, and get your other tourists. This is a special plea for me. Get your tourists that are coming now interested in coming back for this event, because we want this to be a great event for the city. And now I've definitely used up my time. Thank you for your patience. Really appreciate it.
So is this on? I have a question from Zoom. Any contribution by the Helicopter Museum located in Chester County?
That's a great question. I have not talked to them yet. I don't have a particular contact there, and I don't know if they have any flyable things that they can bring, but I think that would be a great person for me to talk to. So thank you. I will try to talk to the Helicopter Museum. Yes, sir.
I have a dumb question.
There are no dumb questions, only
You
dumb
talked
answers.
About the Navy and the Marines from
Yes.
the beginning.
Yes.
You had seamen in the Navy. What are the difference between Navy and Marines?
Oh, that depends on who you ask. You can fit this in. I don't like these, but you can use them if you want. The Navy and Marines are both part of the Department of the Navy. Joke number one. The men's department is the Marines Corps. That's joke number one. The Navy and Marines work together. The Navy is their transport division. I don't hear jokes from the Navy making fun of the Marines. There's plenty of jokes from the Marines making fun of the Navy, but they work both for the Secretary of the Navy, and their original mission for the Marines was to be on board ship, shooting from the top foretops down with their rifles while the cannons were firing. And one thing that's happening now, obviously they've morphed over the years to become an expeditionary landing force. And then recently they were fielding full Army type divisions in places like Afghanistan. They are changing that now. They've gotten rid of all their tanks. They're trying to become a marine amphibious force again, because the enemy that's most likely to cause a war with us of serious nature wants to take islands. So they are actually getting back to their nautical roots now, but they are very different services. The Marines are the most traditional service. There's another old joke. The Army and the Navy are military services. The Air Force is a corporation, and the Marines are a cult. And if you ask Marines that, they do not deny that, which is fascinating to me. But in any case, they are twin services. One of the surprises here for me was that we were going to offer them separate celebrations. And the Marines said, no, we want to celebrate with the Navy. Why? Because the Navy will bring an amphibious ship and we can live on it, not pay hotel bills. And because the weather is better in October. You're welcome. Yes, sir.
Yes,
It's on.
yeah, I just wanted to ask you if you're familiar with the Navy League and if you've been in touch with the Philadelphia Council of the Navy League here in Philadelphia.
I am very familiar with the Navy League. The Navy League Council of Philadelphia was one of our first partners when we had our gala last fall. They were one of the sponsors of it. We've been endorsed. If you go on our website, and did I advance this to the slide that actually has the website? There we go. If you go on our website, you will see we've got, to get this, commits the Secretary of the Navy, we got endorsements from everybody we could. And that now includes the National Navy League, the National Marine Corps League, their state chapters, departments as well. The DAR has been a tremendous supporter of ours because they recognize this one of the great events for the semi-quincentennial of the Revolution of the United States. Really, it's been a whole number of veterans, the National VFW, the National Jewish War Veterans. We're very honored to have the support of a lot of wonderful organizations.
The Navy League, when the Navy used to bring up their ships, they would always organize big events and everything surrounding the Navy and host the Navy, basically take them around town.
Right.
So
The Navy League has had a great role in that. They were big on ship commissionings. Some of you may remember that I was talking about the San Antonio class amphibious assault ships. There were 2 of them commissioned here in the last 20 years. Before there was cruisers here, destroyers commissioned here. They used the sponsoring groups for that. They did a nice job when the USS Cooperstown came here in October. They did a really nice job of hosting those sailors. We really want to work with them, and we hope this event will build support for them. Yes, ma'am. Oh, sorry. You have the mic.
Yes.
You win.
Okay. As a daughter of the veteran of the USS Missouri,
Yes.
I just wanted to say that you wanted a Navy joke about the Marines.
Okay.
In World War II, they called them seagoing bellhops.
Okay. Well, they certainly had the uniform for it. I'll just mention, for a point of Philadelphia pride, when the Navy decided to build the Iowa-class battleships, they were building 4 of them. 2 were built in Brooklyn, 2 were built here. Ours were built so quickly that even though the Iowa was built first, then the New Jersey, that the Wisconsin, which is the one that with the latest number, was finished before the Missouri. And there was a very good argument, no offense to the Missouri, that the New Jersey, which was the flagship for Halsey and Spruance, should be the ship that went into Tokyo Bay. But the president happened to be from Missouri, and his daughter commissioned the vessel with the champagne. So it got to be the ship that was in Tokyo Bay. Who's got the mic now?
You mentioned the Aegis program that was developed in Moorestown. Would that be of interest to the Marines? Could you tie that in somehow?
Oh, I think, well, one of the ships coming, that R.L.A. Burke destroyer, the picture with all the 4 ships together, that is an Aegis. That's the modern Aegis ship. So that system's coming. And I think one of the things that the Navy, I suspect Lockheed Martin has a strong interest in making that a big deal. And the Marines, there is a land-based version of that, but the United States doesn't buy it. People like Japan buy it.
I'm thinking of touring the plant, Lockheed, which was RCA at the time, the Radio Corporation
Right.
division. We grew up. That was my dad's project. He was
Well-
an engineer on that project.
Well, thank you, because that was
Fascinating.
a tremendous project. It's been very helpful to the defense of the United States. And it's right now doing great work in the Red Sea. All those drones and things are getting shot down. It's mostly by that system. I don't know if Lockheed would let us have tours, but if they would, that would be a great
They
thing for people to do.
I know you just have to show your citizen, you have to show your documentation before you go.
All right. Thank you for telling, I did not know that. Thank you for telling me that. I'm going, but whoever has the mic.
If you're looking for other venues to have things at City Hall, we have a big plaque in honor of Smedley Butler.
That's
in
right.
North Portal. We have a bell on the 2nd floor near the mayor's area from, it's the USS Philadelphia, I'm not sure. Yes.
Is that probably the cruiser Philadelphia from the Second World War?
Right,
Right.
right. And we also have a piece from the Marine. We have one of those plaques that were created from the ship of the City of the Maine
Right.
on the floor of City Hall. But we also have big display cases where we do exhibits.
Okay.
So if you wanted to get in touch with the head of the exhibits, maybe something.
Well, one thing I would, before I forget to mention it, there are brochures up here for everybody. Anybody who wants to be in direct contact with me about this, I could give you my card. And if you can help me get in touch with the person who runs that at the City Hall, I'll be happy to include that. Thank you.
First a comment, then a question. Being part of the amateur boxing community, I've had the privilege of working the brigade championships at Annapolis and other boxing events right in the shadow of John Paul Jones's tomb. They take their boxing seriously at Annapolis. It would be nice if the Navy could bring a boxing team, maybe have Army on some of the other colleges, even armed services boxers, as part of the athletic observance. So
That-
Philadelphia is the best boxing city on the
Right.
planet.
Well, I was just saying before this, my wife decided that for her significant birthday, we were going to Japan. And when we were in a taxi cab, person asked us where we were from. And I said, Philadelphia, the birthplace of the United States, where the Liberty Bell and Independence Hall is. Nothing. And then I said, and Benjamin Franklin's from here. Nothing. And there was a movie set here called Rocky. Oh, Rocky. It turned out the only 2 people he knew from Philadelphia were Rocky and Bryce Harper, because they watch baseball in Japan. So no, I agree that the box, that would be, I had not thought of that, but this is a great boxing town.
can
If
work
you
with
have,
that.
yes, work
Okay.
with me on that, because
Well,
I could use the
do
help.
have a compound question, which I'm
Yes.
sure you would not allow in your courtroom.
Okay.
But because we were creating something out of nothing in 1775, can you address how the Marines were initially recruited, how and where they were trained, and who provided the training?
Right. The expert on Tun Tavern at the Tun Tavern Legacy Foundation makes the point that while you could join the Army or the Navy from any place, the only place you could become a Marine was in Philadelphia. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily true, but he is an expert. So the Marines were recruited here, hopefully not by getting them drunk in the bar, like the British Navy used to do, but just because they were as you know, taverns, other than churches, if you wanted to gather in colonial times, those were the two places to go. And if you didn't want to be in a church, which was not appropriate for this, the tavern was the place. I think they were recruited here. People would come here to join the Marines. Their training, I imagine, was quite rough. As you know, from the Continental Army, they were sort of making that stuff up as they went along until they got some Europeans to show them how to do it. And even then, they were still pretty rough. But you said compound.
We had to get somebody who knew what they were doing. Right. or
Yeah, I
lots
don't
of-
know if they ever found a von Steuben or if they had any British Marines because the British Marines are older, as they tell the US Marines all the time. If they had any British Marines who had defected to come to the United States to train them, I think, as I said, I think they just made it up. Just like John Adams, when he wanted to create a Navy, just crammed from books to try to figure out how to do that. So I suspect some of the young officers like Samuel Nicholas maybe crammed from books to try to figure out how to run a Marine Corps. You're welcome. Any other questions?
Are we gonna have the Army Navy football game?
That's an excellent question. As you may know, the current contract, times have changed. So tradition doesn't matter quite as much as money does. And under the current contract, the Army Navy game we wanted to get it here for this. We asked them Philadelphia to try, and they tried. The next Army Navy game here will be 2027. But one of my goals, yeah, I know they even skipped over 26, which is unconscionable if you ask me. Look at the Major League Baseball figured it out. I don't know why football couldn't figure it out. But one of my hopes of this, I have a few hopes for this. One, I've already mentioned, is showing the youth of this area they have an opportunity to serve their country if they don't have other opportunities that are better. The second is to reconnect this area and the industrial base. A third one is just to help this area get back in the good graces of the Navy and Marine Corps, to get them wanting to have the Army Navy game here. And there are some reasons, which I won't go into, why they're not in the good graces of the Navy, for that purpose. And so I think if we do a great job of bringing the Navy brass here, of bringing the Secretary of the Navy here, that can help them in the next contract negotiation. The other thing I'm hoping this will do, there's a Fleet Week in New York every year. San Francisco, San Diego, they all have annual Fleet Weeks. Philadelphia hasn't had a Navy and Marine Corps celebration until we did one last year, our combined Navy and Marine Week, which is not as big as a Fleet Week is. And with this, what we're doing now is a Super Fleet Week. My hope is once we prove to them they can bring their ships here and their sailors and Marines can have a good time here, and that this is a great place for that they'll start having at least periodic and maybe even annual Fleet Weeks here, so that every summer the Navy shows up with ships and the Marines show up and they do good deeds and they perform, and tourism benefits. So I'm hoping it'll have that effect. I can't promise that it will, but that's the goal. One of the goals. Yes, sir.
The current Navy and Marine exhibit in New Hall is a little weak. Are you planning to beef that up?
As you may notice, I am a fairly ambitious guy, arguably a sort of the nice word people use is visionary, which when they want to tell you that you're not practical. But New Hall at the moment, my hope is that they reopen it, because there are plans to change its entire purpose. As you may remember, the reason it's there was recreated for the bicentennial, because that's where General Knox was the head of the Department of War, which originally, when they recreated the Navy he was also the head of the Navy, and then they decided they needed a Secretary of the Navy. So it's tremendous. I mean, it's not a historic building, it's a recreation, but it should serve that purpose. What you may not know, although I bet you do, is next door was the originally Navy and Marine Museum was next door at the Pemberton House. Have you been in the Pemberton House? Do you know there's a half frigate in there? There's a whole place where they have a wall of a frigate, and you can walk into a gun deck and there's cannon there, which they still haven't removed. And you can walk down the stairs and see the outside of the frigate. But then at some point they decided to consolidate everything into New Hall, all three services. And so there's an office building with a frigate in it now. I don't know what they're going to do with that. I'd love to see them reopen that, or let people see the frigate while it's sitting there otherwise unusable. But I'm hoping I've talked with the superintendent. The new superintendent no, his office is in the Mercantile Exchange, if I have the name right. Really? Well, I thought it was in the, well, I might be wrong. I thought it was in the Mercury. That's when I met with him, that's where he was. But and I liked I don't know if you've dealt with the Park Service, I'm sure for many years. I don't know if you dealt with the new superintendent. I think he's going to be a good superintendent, and he's very supportive of this because he recognizes it's good for the park and the nation. So I hope that they will reopen New Hall. That, I'm told, is the plan. What New Hall will come after that, whether it gets more associated with Carpenter's Hall or has a whole new purpose. But you're right, it's tired, but open and tired is better than closed. Any other questions? The original site or the it's about 15 South 2nd. It's the Parkway parking lot. Right. But I give them great. But the Tun Tavern Legacy Foundation found the money to buy a not cheap piece of land so they could rebuild this tavern. We're done.
I was going to say, give him a big round of applause. Cool. So we went pretty late, so I'm not going to do the Destination Capitol Hill. That's nothing urgent about that. We'll do that another time. It's almost 8:30, but I just wanted to say quickly what our announcements are. May 21st is the book club. May 21st in the afternoon. If you have not done the active shooter training that the Park Service is holding with the FBI, definitely sign up. It's really well done. It's totally worth your time. I went to the one in April. It's free, so it's a great opportunity. They invited us. Yeah, it's really, really good. So definitely do that if you can. That's May 21st. We don't have anything this weekend, do we? Oh, Friday the 10th, Vince. Speak up, Vince. Speak up. Yeah, the 10th. So this Friday, we still have room, right? Yeah, so let Vince know. It's in the newsletter, or any of us, if you want to email, we'll get it to Vince. If you want to go Friday to Cliveden, if you want to go to lunch afterwards, let Vince know. We could go to Valley Green. I think those are the big things coming up. I don't know what that is. Yeah, somebody sent me an email about that, and I checked the link and it was fine. So I don't know. Just look on the website. It's in the website. Yes. Yeah, it's phillyguides.org. Oh, you're talking about him. I'm sorry. You're talking about the tour guides or him? Oh, the tour guides. So it's phillyguides.org. Like guides, like tour guide. Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah. And we have some cards up here. So if you want to take a business card, it has the web address on it. Yeah. So thank you all for coming. Another round of applause for George. It was worth every minute.